Hollywood heavyweight Robert De Niro detonates on live TV, taking a cheap swing at President Trump and calling him dumb. But Vice President J.D. Vance isn't about to let that slide. In a fiery, completely unplanned showdown, Vance steps out and tears De Niro's whole rant to pieces live, uncensored, in front of millions. No one in the media saw it coming. And now, the clip is blowing up everywhere. It was supposed to be a normal late-night talk show. Bright studio lights, a cheerful crowd, and a host smiling so hard his jaw might have cracked. Tonight's star guest, Hollywood royalty Robert De Niro himself. The topic? America's cultural divide. What happened instead? A meltdown no one scripted. As the cameras rolled and the audience laughed casually, De Niro leaned into the mic, eyes cold, voice sharp. "Let me make this real simple," he growled. "Trump is the dumbest human ever to sit in the Oval Office." Gasps. Silence. Then a few confused claps from people who thought it might be a punchline. It wasn't. De Niro doubled down. He's a grubby real estate hustler, a washed-up playboy, a loser, a tyrant, a disgrace. Backstage, Vice President J.D. Vance, scheduled for the next segment, had just walked in. He watched the screen, fists tightening. Those insults weren't just thrown at a political rival. They were aimed at the man Vance serves and the country he fights for. In that moment, Vance made a choice. He wasn't staying silent anymore. The host tried to keep things moving, but De Niro wasn't finished. He should resign right now. He's wrecking the country, and anyone with a functioning brain knows it. That's when J.D. Vance walked onto the stage without being introduced. The audience gasped again. Cameras snapped to a split screen. De Niro flushed, furious. Vance steady, controlled, walking in like a soldier heading toward a battlefield. The host stuttered. "Vice President Vance, we were just about to wrap up." Vance raised a polite hand. "No need. I just felt like joining early." Something Mr. De Niro said caught my attention. The room tightened. De Niro scoffed. "Oh, you're here to defend your boss? The tyrant?" Vance didn't flinch. "I used to admire you, Mr. De Niro. Truly. I watched The Godfather Part 2 with my dad. You were a hero to us. But somewhere along the way, you traded your legacy for cheap applause." The entire stage froze. Vance's voice stayed calm, but it cut like a blade. "You're not angry because Trump failed, sir. You're angry because he succeeded without Hollywood's permission." De Niro tried to interject, but Vance kept going. "You call Trump a hustler. Fine. But what does that make you? You made millions playing pretend tough guys, and now you sit on TV acting like you speak for everyday Americans." The audience didn't know which side to cheer for anymore. Vance inhaled. "You're suffering from something real, a terminal case of Trump Derangement Syndrome. You're so blinded by anger you can't even acknowledge what he's done for this country." De Niro glared, searching for a comeback. Vance stepped in closer. "I used to be a fan. But when you attacked Trump for putting Americans first, when he deported the illegal migrants brought in under Biden to protect American families, and you called that tyranny, that's when it clicked." He turned toward the camera. "This isn't about Trump. This is about a Hollywood elite who can't handle the fact that the American people finally have their own voice." The audience sat in stunned silence. The moment had already gone viral in real time. "You don't speak for working-class Americans," Vance continued. "You live behind gates, you fly private, and you lecture the people suffering under the policies you applaud." De Niro folded his arms, forcing a laugh. "Oh, don't turn this into politics. I have the right to say what I think, and I have the right to answer," Vance replied. "And the American people have the right to hear the truth." The host, caught in the crossfire, tried desperately. "Maybe we should go to a commercial break." "No," Vance said, firm, unwavering. "America's had enough breaks, enough silence. Not anymore." The audience began clapping, hesitant at first, then louder, stronger. Viewers at home could feel it. For the first time in years, J.D. Vance wasn't just the vice president. He was saying what millions had felt but never heard aloud. Vance turned back to De Niro, his voice softening not for the actor, but for the truth. "I grew up watching your films. My mom worked 2 jobs so we could afford movie nights. Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, all of them." You weren't just an actor, you were a part of our home. A hush swept the studio. But then you changed, Vance said quietly. Not because you grew, but because you let hate swallow everything. You chose to attack a man, our president, simply because he won without your blessing. De Niro stared ahead, hollow and speechless. For the first time in his career, he had no comeback. Vance turned straight to the camera. Robert De Niro lost me the moment he started mocking a president who was fighting to bring back American jobs, deport violent criminals, and protect families, Vance said. You don't have to love Trump, but you don't get to call him a tyrant for doing the things weak men are too scared to attempt. Somewhere in Ohio, an elderly woman watching television began to cry because finally someone wasn't backing down. J.D. Vance drew in a slow breath and walked toward the center of the stage. The cameras kept rolling. The entire studio went still. Not even the crew dared to shift. You want to know why you're really upset, Mr. De Niro? Vance asked. Because under Biden, nothing in your world changed. Open borders? You were fine with it. Foreign studios? Flooding Hollywood? You didn't bat an eye. He paused, letting the silence dig in. But under Trump, we're putting America first again. Illegal migrants flown in during Biden's chaos, they're being deported. American jobs, they're coming back. And Hollywood, it's finally facing consequences with a 100% tariff on foreign-made films. The crowd murmured in shock. Vance continued, his voice trembling with a mix of frustration and conviction. You used to carry yourself like a patriot. Now you read from the deep state script. You traded courage for clout. Legacy for lies. You didn't evolve, you went woke. That word bounced through the room. De Niro's face reddened, but he still didn't answer. Vance's next words came softer, but heavier. You had a gift, sir. And you used it to divide. To smear truth. To poison what people believed. Worst of all, you let hatred write the last chapters of your life. A tear slid down the cheek of a stagehand in the wings. The audience didn't cheer. They just felt the weight of it. Something in the room shifted. People who had come expecting jokes and celebrity banter now sat frozen, moved, conflicted, questioning. In the back row, a teenage boy nudged his mother. Mom, is that true about the tariffs and the illegals? She nodded, eyes glossy. Yes, sweetheart, it is. On stage, De Niro let out a forced laugh. Go ahead, play the patriot card all night. This isn't politics, it's character. Trump's still a fool. J.D. didn't fire back with anger. He answered with reality. I've sat in briefings reviewing real threats to our citizens, fentanyl pouring in, cartel violence, gangs embedded in border towns. Do you know how many Americans were buried because of Biden's open border policies? He swallowed, the emotion raw. Try telling those grieving mothers that Trump is the problem. A woman in the audience began to cry softly. She had lost her son to fentanyl last year. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was pain undeniable. Human pain. And J.D. Vance had just ripped Hollywood's illusion in half with truth and compassion. Vance stepped toward the front row and locked eyes with an older man wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap. You know what cuts deepest? Vance asked, voice breaking. It's when people who never wore a uniform, never stood a post, never saluted a flag sit in cushy studios and call patriots tyrants. He turned back to De Niro. You never fought for this country. Trump did. Not with a rifle, but with courage. He stood up to the globalists, the Hollywood elites, the media titans who hated him before he even set foot in the Oval Office. A hush swept the room. I remember my grandfather crying the night Trump imposed the first tariff, Vance said quietly. Finally, he told me. Someone who remembers us. The tears in J.D.'s eyes weren't for show. They were for the forgotten, the people men like De Niro never bothered to see. To you, Mr. De Niro, Trump is a punchline, Vance said. To us, he is hope. To a family in Ohio, he's the reason they're working again. To a widow in Texas, he's the reason her daughter doesn't have to walk past traffickers every morning. Soft applause began, hesitant, then genuine, then growing. Truth had entered the room. De Niro's jaw tightened. The insults had stopped. The smirk had died. J.D. Vance faced him. Gentler now. I wish it didn't come to this, Vance said. You were a hero to my generation. You inspired millions, but the day you chose to mock a sitting president simply for loving his country, that was the day your legacy cracked." He continued, "Hollywood once told American stories. Now it tries to erase them. While Trump was building, you were sneering. While he was fighting for American workers, you were hosting fundraisers to tear him down." De Niro stood stiff, arms crossed but silent. And Vance finished the moment with a truth De Niro couldn't swat away. "You went woke. You let bitterness write your ending. And that, more than anything, is what breaks my heart." A woman in the audience began openly sobbing. A crew member leaned toward her and whispered, "He's right. I used to adore De Niro. Now I don't even know who he is anymore." Vance looked back into the camera, steady, emotional, unshaken. You can't heal a nation by attacking the people who protect it, and you can't build unity on a foundation of pure hatred. Across the country, millions were glued to their screens. Something rare, something historic was happening in real time. The studio felt frozen, locked in a moment no one dared break. Even the host, famous for dodging controversy, sat stiff and pale. He knew this wasn't a celebrity chit-chat anymore. This was history being recorded live. De Niro suddenly looked small, not the legend he once was, but a man shrinking beneath the weight of truth. J.D. Vance turned slightly, addressing the entire nation through the lens. "I don't hate you, Mr. De Niro," he said softly. "I pity you, because somewhere along the way, you stopped acting and started believing the lies whispered by elites who never cared about this country." A camera zoomed in on De Niro. His lips pressed tight. He blinked faster than usual. Vance scanned the room. His eyes landed on a young mother holding a handmade sign. "Support our troops. You see her?" Vance pointed. "That's America. Not the red carpets, not the champagne galas. It's people like her, the ones who wake up early, love their families, work hard, and simply want a future worth believing in." In living rooms across the country, people reached for tissues. They weren't watching politics. They were watching someone finally speak for them. Inside the control room, panic erupted. The segment was completely off script. Phones rang. Sponsors asked questions. But the director understood one thing perfectly. The world was watching. Back on stage, Vance pressed forward. "Mr. De Niro, you said President Trump should resign because he's the worst man for the job. But I've sat with him in the Situation Room. I've watched him comfort the mother of a fallen soldier. I've seen him sign orders at midnight to bring home a missing American child." The crowd shifted, visibly moved. "You dare call him a tyrant?" Vance asked. No tyrant cries behind closed doors when a folded flag is handed to a grieving family. De Niro shifted uncomfortably. He tried to smile, his lips trembled. "Your movies once brought this country together," Vance added. "Now your words tear it apart. And that doesn't just sadden me, it frightens me." A military veteran in the second row suddenly rose to his feet and gave a salute. No one asked him to. The entire room turned to look. It was no longer an argument. It was a reckoning. And J.D. Vance was holding the mirror. Vance faced De Niro again, softer this time. "Your legacy isn't gone," he said quietly. "But it's in real danger. Not because of Trump, but because of you." De Niro blinked repeatedly. The tough guy persona had collapsed. For the first time, America saw something he never showed on screen. Vulnerability. "You let yourself become a weapon," Vance continued. "A tool for people who despise this country's rebirth. You mocked Trump for making hard decisions, yet you cheered when Biden allowed waves of people with no ID to walk across our border unchecked." A low murmur rolled through the audience. "You despise the America First agenda," Vance said, "because it doesn't put you first. But real Americans love it because it finally puts them first." At that moment, the giant screen in Times Square, normally looping movie trailers, cut to the live broadcast. Thousands in the rain stopped walking and stared upward. Vance looked into the camera for the final time that hour. "Hollywood spent years telling America who their heroes were," he said. "Tonight, the people choose their own." And with that, J.D. Vance walked off stage. Not to applause, but to something far more powerful. Respect. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Clips of the confrontation hit every platform like lightning. Hashtags spun out instantly. Number Vance shatters De Niro. Number. Truth on air. Number. America First speech. Millions of comments poured in. A few media outlets tried damage control. Vice President Vance bullies actor on live TV. But it didn't matter. People had seen the truth with their own eyes, and they felt something they hadn't felt in years. Pride. In a small diner in Pennsylvania, a retired coal miner wept into his coffee. In a church basement in Alabama, veterans bowed their heads in a silent prayer of gratitude. And in the White House, President Trump watched the clip on replay, smiling. "That's my guy," he whispered to an aide. Straight truth. No filter. And in Hollywood, there was silence. For the first time in a long time, their voices weren't louder than the roar of the American people. J.D. Vance had yanked the curtain wide open, and the country finally saw what was hiding behind it. Not artistry, not integrity, just arrogance. Backstage, Robert De Niro slumped into a leather chair, shaken to the core. A makeup assistant offered him a bottle of water. He didn't take it. He stared instead at the monitor replaying the broadcast. First his own rant, then Vance walking on stage, then the audience shifting, clapping, crying, saluting. Not for him, for J.D. Vance. "You okay, Mr. De Niro?" the assistant asked gently. He didn't answer. He only muttered, barely audible, "That wasn't supposed to happen," because something had pierced him deep. Not embarrassment, not defeat, but the awful realization that he may have lost the people he once believed he spoke for. He unlocked his phone. Hundreds of angry comments, disappointed fans, and a video from a little boy in Kentucky asking, "Mom, why was that actor so mean to President Trump?" It hit him hard, because that kid represented the America De Niro had forgotten while basking in Hollywood applause. The man who once played heroes had drifted far from acting like one. Somewhere inside, he knew Vance had a point, but he would never admit that publicly. Not now. It was too late. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance didn't head straight back to Washington. Instead, he told his driver, "Take me through the heart of the city." They drove past shelters, diners still glowing at midnight, loading docks, gas stations buzzing under fluorescent lights. Vance watched a worn-out waitress locking up a cafe, a single mom waiting at a bus stop with 3 kids, a janitor mopping the floor of a small church. These were the people he had spoken for on stage. Not the reviewers, not the elites, not Robert De Niro. His phone buzzed. A message from President Trump. "You crushed it." J.D. smiled. Not out of ego, but out of relief. Someone finally stood up not just for Trump, but with him. As the motorcade passed an abandoned steel factory, Vance told the driver to stop. He stepped out into the cold night air, walked toward the rusted gates and whispered, "This is who we fight for." Under a flickering streetlight, wind tearing at his coat, J.D. Vance didn't feel like a politician. He felt like a soldier defending the country's soul. Across the nation, in a modest living room in Youngstown, Ohio, a retired steelworker named Roger sat frozen before his TV. The debate replayed on every channel. His daughter walked in holding his sleeping grandson. "Dad, you okay?" Roger wiped a tear he didn't know had fallen. "I never thought I'd live long enough to see someone stand up to those Hollywood bullies," he whispered. "J.D., he said everything I've wanted to yell for years." He looked down at his grandson nestled in his arms. "You see, sweetie," Roger murmured, "when I worked the line we built real things, steel, parts, tools. Then they shipped it all away. Guys like me were tossed aside." His daughter nodded quietly. "But tonight," Roger said, voice cracking. J.D. Vance stood up and said, "You still matter. And maybe your generation will get something better than mine did." Across thousands of American homes just like his, hearts were healing. For once, they weren't invisible. For once, someone had spoken for them. Inside the West Wing, President Trump watched the viral clip with a satisfied smile. Barron stood next to him, scrolling through endless reactions on his phone. "Sir," an aide said, stepping in. "Fox, OANN. Even a couple of CNN analysts are talking about it. Some are calling it the Vance reversal." Trump grinned. He didn't just reverse it, he flipped the whole script. He picked up his phone and typed a post. "J.D. Vance, true American patriot, Spoke for the forgotten, the heartland, and the brave. Couldn't be prouder. That's leadership. America first. Barron chuckled. He really rattled De Niro, didn't he? Trump laughed. De Niro thought he was the voice of the people. Turns out he's just an echo. He stood and looked out the window toward the Washington skyline. Vance just made history, he said quietly. And the left doesn't even realize tonight was the turning point. Across the country, in a Beverly Hills mansion, a high-end dinner party took a dark turn. Producers, directors, and actors stared at their phones in disbelief. He called him woke on national TV, one producer muttered, horrified. And for the first time, Hollywood realized their grip on the narrative was slipping. And the room cheered. One screenwriter said, stunned. A veteran actor pushed his chair back and stood. We used to stand up for the working man, he said quietly. Now we laugh at him. The table fell silent. For the first time, some of them wondered if they were on the wrong side of the story. In a corner booth, a young actress wiped away a tear. I grew up in a town like the ones J.D. Vance talked about, she whispered. We weren't racist, we weren't backwards. We just wanted someone to listen. I walked away from all that. Maybe I shouldn't have. The only sound in the room came from a phone on the table, softly replaying Vance's final line. Hollywood told America who their heroes were. Today, the people choose their own. Something had cracked, and it wasn't going to be patched over with a PR statement. In a small living room in Iowa, a gold-framed photo sat on the mantel. Private Daniel Myers, age 20, smiling in his army fatigues. His mother, Teresa, sat in front of the TV, hands trembling, eyes swollen. She had just watched J.D. Vance's speech for the third time. When he spoke about Trump folding flags for fallen soldiers, she broke because that same folded flag sat in her hallway, untouched, since the day it was handed to her. Biden never came. Not a visit, not a call, not even a form letter. Trump did. He called. He cried with her. And now J.D. Vance had reminded the world of that moment. Teresa sobbed into her hands. Not from fresh grief, but because for the first time since Daniel's funeral, she felt remembered. Music swell. J.D. Vance wasn't reciting a script. He meant every word. Teresa picked up her phone and typed, "My son died during Biden's chaos." Trump called. Biden didn't. Vance remembers us. Thank you. The post exploded. Her pain turned into a signal fire, and J.D.'s raw, unscripted words had lit the match. Hours after the broadcast, inside the late-night studio, the host, David Lyle, sat alone on stage, watching the raw feed again. This wasn't the show he'd planned. He'd expected easy laughs, edgy jokes, maybe another viral De Niro moment. Instead, something bigger had happened. Something real. J.D. Vance had turned a comedy bit into a national reckoning. David rubbed his temples. He wasn't a Trump supporter. Never had been. But even he couldn't deny what he'd just witnessed. The room hadn't turned against De Niro. It had turned toward the truth. His producer walked up. David, are we running the rerun tomorrow? David hesitated, then whispered, yeah, but uncut. Every word. That night, David Lyle did something rare in his career. He went live on Instagram, staring straight into the camera. I don't agree with everything J.D. Vance said, he admitted. But tonight, I watched a man fight for people who've been forgotten. For once, I didn't feel like a host. I felt like a viewer watching a country wake up. It wasn't politics anymore. It was something deeper, and millions felt it. Across the city, in his Manhattan apartment with the blinds drawn, Robert De Niro sat alone. The glass of whiskey on the table remained untouched. His phone buzzed nonstop. Publicists, activists, friends, most of them panicking, some urging him to hit back. He ignored them all. Not out of pride. Out of shock. He replayed J.D. Vance's speech for the 5th time. Every sentence felt like a mirror being held to his face. You were a hero to my generation. That line would not leave his head. He had spent decades building his name, polishing his legacy. And in less than 10 minutes, J.D. Vance had made millions of Americans see through it. He opened Twitter. The top trend. De Niro is no hero. Right under it. Thank you, J.D. Vance. He set the phone down and stared out at a city he barely recognized anymore. For the first time in years, he said nothing. No interview, no statement, no rage-filled rant. Because deep down, though he'd never admit it, he knew he had lost something he once claimed to represent. The people. And J.D. Vance had just taken up that banner. In the early morning hours, De Niro found himself pacing his hallway. His reflection glared back at him from a massive antique mirror. But it wasn't the bold, untouchable icon the world knew. It was an aging man, suddenly aware of what fame had cost him. He remembered the Oscars, the red carpets, the global praise. None of it felt substantial anymore. The only thing echoing in his mind was J.D. Vance's voice. You traded courage for clout, legacy for lies. He dragged a hand through his graying hair and whispered, "How did I end up here?" This wasn't about left versus right anymore. It was about truth. And tonight, J.D. Vance had been the one who spoke it. For the first time in decades, De Niro didn't feel powerful. He felt exposed, and maybe, deep inside, ashamed. He grabbed the remote and flicked on the news. Every major channel replayed the clip. They weren't mocking it. They were analyzing it, respecting it, even praising it. The tide had turned, and De Niro was going under. Hundreds of miles away in Indiana, a middle-aged school bus driver named Alan sat behind the wheel of his parked bus, eyes fixed on his phone. The moment had seized the country. Alan wasn't political. He preferred quiet mornings and simple routines. But when J.D. Vance spoke about Trump defending forgotten Americans, something inside him cracked open. His father had been laid off during the Obama years. His mother's little shop was crushed by cheap foreign imports. Now his own job sat on the edge, threatened by automation and undercut by illegal labor. Alan wasn't begging for a handout. He was desperate for hope. J.D. Vance had just spoken it out loud. He bowed his head, hands gripping the steering wheel, and whispered a short prayer. God, give that man strength. Don't let the wolves devour him. Let him keep fighting for guys like me. It was simple. It was real. And across the country, the same quiet prayer slipped from the lips of welders, waitresses, truck drivers, and teachers. J.D. Vance wasn't just the vice president anymore. He had become their champion. In a small-town high school in Texas, a civics teacher named Mrs. Lee paused her lesson and turned on the projector. On the screen appeared J.D. Vance facing off with Robert De Niro. The classroom fell silent. Teenagers who were usually checked out, scrolling or whispering, leaned in. Not for gossip, but for something they could feel was different. When Vance said, "Hollywood used to tell American stories, now it tries to erase them," the room went completely still. A student named Maria raised her hand. "Mrs. Lee, is he right about illegals hurting small towns?" Mrs. Lee nodded slowly. "He's not talking about families like yours, Maria. He's talking about the chaos, about the people using you as pawns. And yes, he's speaking for towns that don't get a say anymore." A boy in the back muttered, "He actually sounds brave." Another added quietly, "My dad cried watching this last night." Mrs. Lee paused the clip. "This," she said, "is why we study history. Because every once in a while, someone doesn't just read a script, they write it." The bell rang. Nobody moved. Because this story wasn't over. J.D. Vance had rattled the system, and even the youngest hearts in America felt it. In a dusty auto parts factory on the outskirts of Michigan, the morning shift was clocking in. Men and women in grease-stained overalls crowded into the break room around a tiny TV. The clip played for the 10th time. J.D. Vance's voice bounced off the metal lockers. "You mocked the man fixing the mess you helped create. That's not courage. That's cowardice dressed up as celebrity." Big Joe, a forklift driver who hadn't voted since 2004, stood up slowly. "That guy's got fire," he said. A welder named Mason nodded. "He's the first one since Reagan who sounds like he actually knows us." These weren't political junkies. They didn't live on Twitter. Most of them didn't watch the news unless it cut their hours. But now they couldn't stop watching. A supervisor turned the volume up. "Listen," he said. "Listen to how he talks about our towns." The room went quiet as Vance spoke of shuttered steel plants, fentanyl in rural schools, jobs shipped off to countries that despise America. Some clenched their jaws. Some wiped tears away quickly so no one would see. For the first time in years, hope flickered across the factory floor. Not because of a slogan, but because of a man. That afternoon, J.D. Vance's press secretary walked into his office holding a plain white envelope. "Sir, this came straight from a post office in West Virginia. No staff, no reporters. Just raw," she said. J.D. opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter in fading ink. "Dear Mr. Vance, my husband died trying to protect our town from the drug wave that swept in after Biden's open border. He was a sheriff, a father, and a Trump supporter. When you stood up to Niro last night, I saw my husband in your words. I cried, not from sadness, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt seen again. Thank you for defending men like him. Thank you for defending all of us forgotten folks. A grateful widow." J.D. didn't say a word. He sat there, staring at the letter, hands trembling slightly. Then, quietly, he folded it, slipped it into his coat pocket, and stood up. Because speaking truth wasn't enough anymore. Now, he had to carry it. By evening, the ripple had become a wave. Talk shows, podcasts, CB radios, small-town newspapers, TikTok clips with millions of views. Vance's words spread like wildfire. Not through party machines, but through the people. A viral video showed a teenage boy in Kansas ripping a De Niro poster off his wall. Another clip featured a veteran saying, "I served overseas. J.D. Vance served me tonight." People who had never watched a full political speech in their lives were suddenly replaying his monologue over breakfast. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement. In a single night, the story of a vice president defending a president on live television had turned into something sacred, something soaked in emotion, honesty, and purpose. From ranches in Texas to factories in Ohio, Americans began whispering the same sentence. We found our voice again. And J.D. Vance? He had no idea just how deeply those words had reached. Not yet, but he would. Because America wasn't just listening. America was waking up. As the sun crept over the horizon, J.D. Vance stepped into a quiet radio studio for a scheduled interview. He hadn't slept much. The weight of a nation's hopes is heavier than any title. The host leaned toward the mic. "Mr. Vice President, last night was something America won't forget. Do you have any final words for Robert De Niro?" J.D. Vance looked down, then into the microphone. "I don't have anything left to say to Robert De Niro," he replied calmly. "I've already said what needed to be said." He paused. "But I do have something to say to the American people." The host leaned back. Silence filled the studio. "We've been mocked, ignored, labeled backward for loving our country," Vance said. "But we're not backward. We're strong. We build. We serve. We sacrifice. And I want every man and woman who feels small in this culture war to know this. You matter." The phone lines lit up instantly. A mother sobbing. A farmer thanking him. A Marine saying, "You just gave my kids a reason to believe again." Across the nation, J.D. Vance's name wasn't just trending. It was rising. Not as a politician, but as a patriot. The next morning, De Niro reluctantly agreed to appear on a news program to clarify his remarks. But as the segment began, the anchor rolled a clip of J.D. Vance's response. De Niro froze. Outside the glass, the studio sidewalk crowd didn't cheer like they usually did. They just watched. Some held homemade signs. "Vance spoke for me. Actors don't own the truth. Make America strong again." Suddenly, De Niro stood up. "I'm done," he muttered. He ripped off his mic and walked off set. "Mr. De Niro, wait," the anchor called after him. But he was already gone. In the hallway, a young janitor passed him, nodding respectfully. De Niro looked at him, really looked at him. The man wore a faded t-shirt that read, "Trump, Vance 2024. No anger, no gloating, just quiet, working-class dignity." For the first time in decades, Robert De Niro didn't have a line. He didn't have a comeback. He had lost the room. That evening, in a packed arena in Pennsylvania, J.D. Vance walked out to join President Trump for a scheduled town hall. But the event felt different. As Vance stepped onto the stage, thousands rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Many were crying. Some held up photos of loved ones, lost homes, shuttered businesses, things they believed no one in power remembered. But now, someone did. Trump motioned to JD and simply said, "This man speaks the truth." JD took the microphone. "I didn't plan any of this," he began. "But I want to say something to every person watching, whether you're in a small town, a big city, or sitting in your living room crying because, for once, you felt heard." His voice caught. "You are not forgotten. You are the soul of this nation. And we're going to keep fighting for you, not because it's easy, but because it's right." The crowd roared. Tears streamed. The media had no choice but to cover it. Authentic patriotism had stepped back into the spotlight.